me time out real quick because I don't think anybody has done this still yet with you.
Dude, oh my God, dude, this thing slides. Hey, this is Tyler with MCC, and you guessed it, I'm back with Alexander. It's a 1994 Nissan Silvia, directly from Japan, right-hand drive. Stick around for some great content, and of course, some donuts.
Of course.
Of course. We wouldn't have it any other way.
This is a 1994 Nissan Silvia, and it's the S14 chassis.
Okay. But it's the model is a 240SX?
Yep.
So it's a Silvia 240SX or a...
Just a Silvia.
Okay.
So this is the same thing as like with the 300ZX here. When we had the 300ZX in Japan, it was called the Faro 80.
Gotcha.
Marketing probably wisely chose not to call a car coming to America a Faro 80 because American men would not want to buy a car called a Faro 80
because we're real men.
We don't want to threaten your masculinity with your
Yeah.
car name.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
they got numbered names and things like that, whereas in Japan you had the Silvia and the Faro 80. Although in Japan they did have the 180SX in the S14 chassis, which here we had the 240SX, and that was because when the 180SX first came out, it had a 1.8 liter CA18 motor in it, and then in the States we had a 2.4 liter K24 motor. So the 2.4 and the 1.8 are just a reference to the displacement of the actual motor.
Okay.
Same chassis though.
So because this is an import from Japan, which is why you're on the wrong side.
The wrong side.
The right side. Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
It's a Silvia and
Yep.
not a 240SX or a...
Correct.
Or, okay.
And I don't mind if somebody calls it a 240SX. It's fine.
Do they look similar?
It's the exact same body.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same car, just different motor
Different
that
motor.
came in it, right?
That you couldn't get in the U.S.
Yeah, and you're gonna have, different variations of interior options and stuff like that when it comes to just the design of the fabric and what have you. But I mean, it's the same exact chassis. So
Okay.
yeah, it's some people get a right-hand drive car and they get upset if people think it's the U.S. version, and I'm too old for that, so I don't even care. And plus, I've owned like 7 240SXs and currently own one.
One you just bought,
Yeah,
right?
one I just bought about a month and a half ago.
So why, if you just bought another 240 and you've had 240s, why buy another one?
If you've watched this channel, you may have already picked up on the fact that I seem to like things in multiples.
Yes, because this is your third appearance.
Yep.
2 Corollas.
First 2 are with essentially the same car.
Yep.
Just a coupe and a hatch version. But I really like the S13 chassis. It's a lot of fun. It's what I started with 21 years ago when I got my first 240SX. And so I wanted another one. I eventually plan on giving this vehicle to my daughter when she's old enough.
Because she shares the same name?
She does share the same name. Her name is Silvia, so I'll let you do the math if you think that I'm actually a lover of these cars or if it's just a weird coincidence. But she's 8 years old right now, so I got time on my side. But
yeah.
I figured good deal came up, strike while the iron's hot, and pick up another one.
Did you import this yourself, or was it already in the States?
So I bought this car from a dealership called Japanese Classics. They're out of Virginia, and they're one of the top well-known importers for right-hand drive cars. They've been doing it for, over a decade.
Okay.
And essentially they do all the title paperwork, all the importation documentation and everything. So you do end up paying a little bit more money, but that's because they're doing a lot of work for you.
Right.
And yeah, that's how I ended up getting it. This was April of 2020. So essentially,
was this like the last car in the country that allowed into the country at that point?
That's a great question. I don't know what was going on with customs at that point with COVID and everything, but I do know that my brain, as most people's, was not in the right place, and I was in no position to really buy a car like this.
Right.
But I always wanted one, and I just randomly one day decided to buy it. So I don't like car payments, but I financed it because I saw this car and something inside me said, you need to have this car. So,
were you nervous at all importing a car or buying a car sight unseen like that?
I wasn't too nervous buying it. The thing that I think made me most nervous was that I paid a significant amount more than I have historically paid for cars that I have bought sight unseen, but I'm no stranger to buying cars from out of state and then driving to pick them up after I conned one of my friends into going out of state for the car with me. So it wasn't that crazy of a deal, but there definitely was some nerves. I felt good in that I didn't really have any hesitation that the paperwork was going to be done right and that there wouldn't be any headache there, but you always wonder when you see a car that's presented well in photographs what it's actually going to look like in person. And I would say that this car is the only car that I've ever owned that photographs just as well as it looks in person. I mean, it
is very clean.
It's very clean. It's not without its flaws. I mean, it's almost a 30-year-old car at this point, but as far as the age being considered and coming from an island country like Japan, it's in really good shape.
I think that's a misconception with a lot of people. They think those cars are just perfect.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rust over there.
It's a 25-year-old car or more. I mean,
in an oceanside island.
There's gonna be a problem.
Right.
You're not gonna get a perfect car.
No.
So, and there's probably rust that I'm not even aware of that exists on this car, and I am aware of some of it, but nothing that I've seen is too alarming at this point. It would be something that I'll have to address at some point down the road, but so far it's the car is just overall really, really clean. Thankfully it didn't come from, I don't think it came from Okinawa. That's where a lot of cars the guys in the military pick up. Gotcha. Which is a spot that's a lot more moisture there, a lot more salt content in the air from what I've been told. I've actually never been to Japan, so don't take me for the expert on that, but from what I've been told is the Okinawa area has a bunch of just absolute rust boxes. So thankfully it didn't come from that region.
Is this the way the car came when you bought it, or have you done some to it, quite a bit to it?
I have done a few things, not a lot. So the car came with R32 GTR wheels on it, which are still on it.
Those are R32 wheels?
Yeah, yep. I wish I could say that I have put other wheels on it, but I've had some 17-inch Super Advents that I bought from Japan about a year ago that have been at a local wheel restoration shop for a lot longer than I anticipated them being there.
Gotcha.
I actually thought I might have gotten back in time for this shoot, but they're still there. So eventually I'll be changing the wheels on it, but the GTR wheels have been pretty great. I mean,
they look good.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a forged wheel, so performance-wise, it's a great wheel to have. Other than that, I changed out the shift knob. There's a S14 Silvia shift knob in here, and the seats that are in it, front and rear, are out of a S14 Silvia Spec R, and it's actually the B package. So not all Spec Rs got this particular seat. So the seats are kind of a big deal. They're in really, really great shape, and
really nice.
You will be hard pressed to even find these seats for sale. And if you do, they're going to run you significantly more than I paid for them, for sure. So yeah, I think that's about it as far as stuff that I've actually added to it. I've just I bought a car that was in great running condition and was in great cosmetic condition, and I get to just drive it. It's got a few modifications on it. It's got a HKS filter and a catback exhaust with a high flow cat, and that's about it for performance stuff, other than being on coilovers. And I always like to say an SR20, I always like to say the best SR20 motor is a stock one, because when you start modifying them, you start to run into a bunch of problems.
Okay.
So that's kind of how this is going to remain.
So stock motor, it's got single turbo, dual?
Yeah, just a 2-liter 4-cylinder with a T28 ball bearing turbo on it, and probably a couple hundred horsepower. So nothing crazy, but enough to feel pretty fun when you're driving it around.
How many? I know. So Cyrus kind of talked about this with the Cappuccino. It's like you never know what the actual mileage is on cars that you import.
Yeah.
How many kilometers were on this one, or miles?
Yeah, so this car had, I want to say 160 or 170,000 kilometers on it.
Okay.
And it delightfully froze at 199,999 kilometers a couple years ago. So it was going to roll 200, and it just decided that it didn't want to, and I haven't really bothered to fix that. So that's where it sits for now.
Wow, so you've driven this thing quite a bit.
I drive it a lot, yeah. I have 4 vehicles, I guess 5 now with the new 240, but all 4 of my vehicles that actually run and drive are my dailies, and this is the newest car that I own. This car is from 1994, and I do not own a car that is newer than this. So yeah, I drive this car all the time, and I love it. Cars are meant to be driven.
Yep. It sounds good. The blow-off sounds good too.
Yeah, it sounds even better when you're sitting in the passenger seat, because it's all on.
It's on this side? Okay. Because it sounds like it's over here.
Yeah. To answer your question from earlier, I have a good friend that I met through these cars that actually had these seats from when he was stationed over there.
Gotcha. Okay.
And he had them in his car and put different seats in, and gave me a good buddy deal.
What a good buddy.
Yes, sir.
Now, what's the lore or the reasoning behind why these have become so popular and so expensive? Do you know, or?
Yeah, so pretty much the blanket answer is that 240s, S chassis in general, are a rear-wheel drive car with usually a manual transmission, although I have swapped 2 240s that I've owned previously from automatic to manual, which is honestly kind of the best way to find it, because if you find an automatic car, you know it hasn't really been beat on that hard.
True,
or
yeah.
If it has, somebody's gone through, you know, Great Lakes to actually treat an automatic vehicle like crap.
Yep.
But yeah, good chance of finding a really solid chassis if it's still an automatic. But manual transmission, rear-wheel drive, and a near 50-50 weight distribution, which means that you can slide these things around and have a lot of fun in them. So this car and the Toyota Corollas that you've also filmed are very, very popular vehicles that kind of pioneered the way for drifting, especially here in the United States. And so they're getting expensive because A, people want them, and B, a lot of them are not around anymore because A, they're old cars, and because a lot of them got crashed.
Yeah. I feel like these used to be a dime a dozen. And they were pretty cheap too for a while, right?
Yeah, so the first one I bought in 2003, I think I paid probably $1,200 for it. And then
dude, that's wild.
That was my daily driver. I drove it down to the SEMA show in Vegas, so from where we're at, about 10 to 12 hours in my 240. I drove that thing everywhere. And then a few months later, I left a note on one that I saw parked in a kind of a weird spot that never moved. It wasn't out front of a house, and got a phone call, and it's the only time I've overpaid for a vehicle because the guy said that his clutch didn't work anymore and a bunch of fluid dripped onto the floor, which immediately told me that he needed a new clutch master cylinder and everything else would be fine.
Yeah.
And he said, if you give me $175 right now, it's yours. So I went to the ATM and pulled out $200 just in good faith for him hanging on to the car for me to get over there and buy it from him. So yeah, you could get some really, really good deals.
So overpaid.
Yes.
For the car. And
paid.
was it just the master cylinder?
That's all it was.
Oh my
Yep. And
God,
funny
dude.
enough, my cousin actually had a front clip off of one of these sitting in his backyard. So I just pulled the master cylinder off of that, and we were good to go.
How much would you sell that car for?
Dude, I think I sold the car for $800.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so I still profited on it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, it was just at the time.
Yeah, at the time.
I was in my 20s. Life was rough. I frequently came into spots in my life where I needed money, which is why I've had so many of these cars, because I've had to sell them and then obtain them again.
Yep.
And yeah, took my chance to make some money, and
Made it happen.
yep, $800.
It's crazy because now one that's completely destroyed is like $6,000.
Yeah.
Or people are asking $6,000 to $8,000 for
Yep.
them. And it's wild. I didn't even realize they were that crazy. I saw like a reel or something a year or two ago and people making fun of that. And then I started looking on Facebook and I was like, this is wild.
Yeah, I think especially just in general with the way car prices have been in the used market, the last 4 years have not been kind to
Any car.
any car, especially these and other cars that are similar to it.
Someone comments on every episode, regardless of the car. This week, your Yellow Hatch AE86 episode. I love these cars, but they're so expensive now.
Yeah.
Across the board, that is the same comment on every car I do an episode with. It doesn't matter the car.
Yeah.
And it's I'm wondering when and if it ever comes crashing back down for some, if not all cars.
I think we're starting to see it, not in any sort of major way.
No, but a dip.
There's definitely a dip, but it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. Obviously, right now coming up on an election in our country,
Yep.
who knows what's going to happen with the economy over the next 4 years, but if we get a strong one back, everything could potentially just go right back through the roof.
Yeah.
People start getting money in their hands and they're going to want to start buying these cars. The wild thing about these cars, maybe not a Silvia, but just S chassis in general, is that you can go on like Facebook Marketplace and look for one, and depending on where you live, typically you can find multiple hits on one in your area that you could potentially buy. And it always surprises me that the AE86 is pretty much not that way. Like in most places, if you search for one, you won't even find one for sale. They come up very few and far between, and that market is really, really dry. And I always kind of thought of the cars as very similar, but I guess you have to keep in mind you're also talking almost a decade's worth of gap between the two cars. So
Right.
There's been, time is not on its side.
I wonder if it's like also just a production thing, first 80s versus the 90s with technology, how many they were able to produce, or if it's also when was last year they made the 240?
So in the United States, it was 97.
Okay, so you think about video games around cars and movies around cars in the early 2000s or late 90s, like this car is a staple, especially in the video. Like the only time I've ever been interested in a 240, or even the first time I ever saw one was in Need for Speed Underground.
Oh yeah.
And Underground 2.
Oh man.
The green one.
Yeah.
And so
I played that game a lot.
So if you think about within 5 years of them stop making these, you have this cult following now of kids that are obsessed with them, and maybe even adults, and so maybe that preserved them early on too.
Yeah.
Or
Could have. What I can tell you is I obsessively played Need for Speed Underground on my Xbox, and I had a 240SX sitting in my driveway at the time.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool fact, and not one many people can say.
No, that's just because I'm old.
Well, and because you're, a cool car guy.
Yeah, there is that.
That does help,
But it's like I remember going to the first Fast and Furious at the movie theater when I was in high school, and a lot of my friends that have cars will say something like, I wasn't even born yet, or I was crawling around in diapers at that time. So it's funny, but honestly, like I love some of these things that are iconic for car culture in America that I was old enough to be around and experience that and have those memories. It's been a lot of fun.
We talk about this, I think, on every episode I do, and I think you and I have even talked about it, but just how young some of the people are in the Boise car community too.
Oh yeah.
That make it feel like you're all so much older, or I'm so much older, even for me. I was on the cusp, so I was born in 92. So I was coherently started to have memories as this stuff was happening. I think it is pretty cool to grow up. Like, I vividly remember watching the Fast and Furious movies and going, holy shit.
Yeah.
And thinking how cool some of those cars were.
This is channel's name is Millennial Classic Cars.
Yep.
And I guess we're both in that range. I'm just on the very, very far end of the other spectrum. I was born in 84, so.
Yeah, and I think people will ask me why, like, Millennial Classic Cars, or why would I only film those cars, or, which I don't. I do all different ranges, but I think if you grew up in that generation or in that time frame of being a millennial, even if you're Gen X and you're on that side of it, the car scene and the cars that were coming out and existed at that time were unbelievable. So you have like this meld of two worlds, right? So you have this classic muscle world of the 60s and early 70s that was still really relevant in the 80s and 90s. And then you have, because that's only 10, 15 years away from that, and we're further away from that now than we were in the 80s and the 90s.
Absolutely.
And so, to the 90s style cars that we love. And so then it's, now you have these 80s cars that were shit on for so long, but were part of our childhoods and growing up, that now have this cult following and are being seen as like, hey, this is why these are pretty cool. Yeah. And then on top of that, then you're growing up in the 90s when you have all these badass cars coming out that like created this massive cult following. Just insane type stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Mark IV Supra came out right when you were born, pretty much.
And I remember growing up being in cars, like I say this in both your AE86 episodes, but those cars remind me so much of the cars I grew up being in as a kid, because, being born in 92, it's most of my family or family members had cars from the 80s. Yeah. And so I remember those things vividly. So it's the Millennial Classic Cars thing is like it's all encompassing from everything I just grew up with. It doesn't have to be made in that time frame.
Definitely. And it's funny the way that the shift of time and the perspective of time is for people, like you mentioned, how when we were kids that there were these older kind of classic muscle cars that felt like really old classic cars at the time. And now these cars are older than the gap was then. And it's funny because I've never had it happen to me, just because I know the process of registering for a classic plate here in Idaho, but I've had some people go down to the DMV, and some of the the older DMV workers will shit on them for trying to get a classic plate for one of these cars, because they'll just look at it and just kind of be stuck in that mentality of like,
this isn't that old.
That's not a classic. That's just like an economy car from the 80s.
Yep. Whoa, you got Bluetooth in here?
I do.
I like the Kenwood head unit.
That was a free head unit.
Dude, you are the king of deals and free.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be picky
very
if I get something that works. Yeah, but I had a friend that actually bought a twin turbo Z32, and this head unit was in it, and he's more of an audiophile than I am, so he couldn't wait to get rid of it. And it's like, hey man,
I think it's perfect for this.
I
It
love
fits
it.
it perfectly, and it's the same color as your other,
yeah,
like OEM gauges.
yeah,
and
just
stuff.
the display color.
Yeah.
Yeah, luckily you can actually change the colors
Oh,
on that,
okay.
so I found one that
Was close.
matched very, very close. So yeah, it looks good.
Why? What do you love about these? That you've owned so many of them and keep buying them. So.
I mentioned this in a previous video, so but most of you watching this probably haven't seen it. I found Japanese drift videos on the internet when I was in high school.
Yep.
And saw these cars in them, and this was the first car I bought because of those videos. Well, let me time out real quick because I don't think anybody has done this still yet with you.
Dude, oh my God, dude, this thing slides. Wow. That there's an edge. That
Yeah.
feels effortless.
Yeah, the turbo helps.
The turbo helps. My only frame of reference is you. So I want to make that clear. But compared to the AE86, it feels like this thing just wants to be sideways. Way
It
more
does,
than
yeah.
that.
Yeah, it you don't have to work really hard, and it feels very, very easy to control it, comparatively speaking. Just again, because of that longer wheelbase, I think that helps out a lot. So I think honestly for me, because I'm not like an expert drifter, I don't claim to be, but I do like playing around in my cars.
Clearly.
Is that it's honestly a little bit easier with like a US 240 that just has the KA24 naturally aspirated engine, because the power curve is so it's so reliable or like predictable. You know kind of exactly what you're getting, whereas in this car sometimes the turbo will really hit like full boost and I won't really be anticipating it, and then it'll actually kick out more than I'm expecting, and you're making corrections for that and stuff.
Yeah.
But luckily that was not the case. Was not the case up there, but
No.
that did really good right there.
That was awesome.
So if you're watching this and he ever approaches you to do a video of your car, and it is a rear-wheel drive vehicle or a very high horsepower all-wheel drive vehicle, please don't let me be the only one that likes to have fun and kill some tires on his videos.
Yeah, donuts are okay. Donuts are approved, or MCC approved. Honestly, more approved than going really fast on any of the roads in Mexico that I take people on, because that's much less scary.
Yeah, the risk factor
is
so
way lower.
So much less.
Whereas, like, when you're hauling ass, you know, that's great, and I love experiencing what the car can do. But I do get a little scared. With that, I don't.
Right.
And now I expect it from you, so I'm not. There's no shock factor anymore. With the first car, I was I was shocked, and then the second one, the way you set that up as, has anybody done this again?
Yeah,
Now I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
But it's still a ton of fun.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do like a 40 mile an hour third gear entry and drift this corner or anything, so I will just keep it slow and safe.
Yeah. This would be a good road for them to do a drift competition on.
Yeah. I actually have a video of one of my longtime friends here that has this motor in an AE86, and
What?
he has been drifting forever, and he links like the first 3 turns on this. He enters it in third gear, just sliding it like crazy. So it's pretty
Dang.
awesome. I'm definitely not that skilled.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely more skilled than me, at least. So I'm impressed.
If you're watching this and you are an S chassis owner, just be kind, be nice, think about community. I would say that in owning Corollas and then owning S chassis, it's been very, very obvious, at least in my experience over the last 2 decades, that people that have Corollas are a lot more community oriented and less scumbaggy. So
Yeah.
It's not all of you. I've got one of my best friends I know from these cars, and so it's definitely not a blanket statement, but just be nice. Take care of your other friends that have these cars and people that want to get into them.
All right. Good closing argument. Thanks for watching. I promise Alexander will no longer be on the channel after this. This is his final episode, except for when he gets the car he just bought ready to go, and maybe his bus or van. It's a van.
It's a van.
It's a van. So we'll see. Maybe he'll be back on. And thanks for watching. Please make sure to subscribe. We're getting awfully close to 1,000 subscribers. Maybe we'll be there by the time this comes out. That's a dream. But your support really matters, and thanks for watching.
Get this guy to 1,000.
Yes, please.
ASAP.
Please.